You're listening to the God Life Culture Podcast, where faith
and what's trending collide. Welcome to the latest episode of the God Life Culture Podcast. This is Eddie.
What's up, everyone? This is Miguel, and you are tuned into the God Life Culture Podcast. We want to take this time right now to say welcome to our podcast. If this is your first time listening, we want to say we hope that you enjoyed today's conversation. If you are a returning listener, we want to let you know thank you so much for coming week after week and checking out our episodes and staying connected, whether it's on our social media or just listening and tuning into our podcast episodes. We want to say welcome back, and we hope that you have enjoyed our podcast episodes in the last few weeks. And like always, today's no exception. We have a good conversation lined up for today. But before we get into it, we want to remind you to be sure to hit that subscribe button. Be sure to leave us a review or rating wherever you are listening from. You can follow us on social media, Facebook and Instagram at God Life Culture Podcast. Check us out on YouTube as well, and stay connected to everything that we are doing.
Yeah.
Weird to say, but this year's wrapping up, believe it or not. Like, we are in November, like the middle of November-ish, right? And the year's coming to an end.
Yeah, and it's funny because me and you were speaking about something earlier today in reference to something we want to plan for next year.
Yeah.
And you were like, I feel like that was like last year that we did that, and it's not. It's been a few months.
Yeah.
But I think that it's just been a crazy year in the sense of and I think that in the beginning of this year, when we were speaking about the future and what's going to happen in 2023, one of the things that we spoke about was all like the great things that we had coming up. There was a lot of birthdays coming up. You had the birth of your child coming up. You had a lot of different accomplishments that were coming up, and then obviously life happens, and there's a bunch of like not so great stuff that happens as well that just makes the year feel so long and heavy, and also makes it feel great because of all the good things. So I think just life happens in a way that if you're not looking at the date, you just like things, it just feels like, oh, that happened so long ago. No, that was only 5 months ago that happened.
And I think it ties into what we spoke about last week, in the sense of like, that's why it's so important to embrace every moment, take advantage of every moment, because then things like this happen where you're just like, man, that was this year, we did that, and at the same time, then it's like already this is your time to start planning and thinking about next year. You know what I mean? True. In whatever sense, that means to you and how that applies to you. If you're, as a part of like a church board or leadership board, or you just need to plan like where you're going on vacation with your family, you know, like now is the time to start thinking about that for next year and setting up your goals and setting up those things that you really want to accomplish. Because believe it or not, December will be here, and then January is here, and 2024 has already begun.
And I think it's always smart. Like, that's one of the things that I always advocate for, is that especially when you're like working on stuff, whether it's church related, work related, that if you want something to get done in the new year, you don't start planning for that in January. You start doing that October, November, the latest, just because of all the fun stuff that's going to happen. You have all the Thanksgivings or the Christmas or the New Year's. So now your time isn't as free as it was before. Everybody's visiting family. Then what happens is that then once January comes, everybody's burnt. So then you want to use January as, okay, we're just going to take January off to like recoup and like rest. Then February comes when you're going to actually start planning stuff. That's not going to happen till a month or two later. Half the year already went by and you didn't get nothing done. So sometimes it's better to be more proactive in planning ahead and giving you that space and that leeway, even if it's months in advance, to just plan stuff to get the ball rolling, so that you're able to enjoy all the fun stuff, and you're leaving room for vacations, you're leaving room for somebody got sick, but it keeps you on track to be able to accomplish those and take advantage of the full year. It doesn't make any sense that you're saying 2024 we're going to do X, Y, and Z, but you don't start planning any of that till March. That doesn't make any sense.
If you fail to plan to fail. That's what they say. So you have to plan, right? And recognizing that, segueing right into our topic, right? Our life is a journey, right? And a part of a journey, there are things that are expected. There are things that are unexpected. There are things you can plan for and things you can't plan for, right? And things that are surprises. And it's just like you have to roll with the punches and deal with all of those things. But earlier we were talking about the idea of spiritual journeys, right? That we go through in our lives. As Christians, right, we go through journeys. As a non-Christian, right, there are individuals who will still go through things in their life that will ultimately lead them to have that encounter with God, right, or that encounter with Jesus. And more specifically, right, I think we were talking about those individuals who come to the faith, right? And they accept Jesus. They have this Jesus moment in their lives. And sometimes it's a public thing, right?
Yeah.
And other times it's just a cousin of yours or a family member of yours that never served the Lord. And one day they, turn their life around and they accept him. And, it's a lot of feelings and emotions that one feels when things like that happens, right? It's like super excited, thrilled, at the same time relieved, right? If it's been like you've been praying for this family member or praying for this friend for years and finally they've come to like accept Jesus and recognize that they need him and all of that, right? But not everyone has those reactions in those moments, right? Especially, I think a lot of times, even when it's not like your family member and it's someone you've just looked up to for a long time. Like, we've seen celebrities, right, profess their faith in Jesus and all of that. And there's always the reaction of individuals feeling so excited and happy that their favorite celeb is now like in the church. And then you have the other side of people just judging and criticizing and like nitpicking everything and wondering if it's real, if it's fake, if it's a publicity stunt, what is it, right?
Yeah.
Why do you think, we're so divided and we have like those reactions? Where does that come from? Why are people so intrigued, with this idea of like, oh, they became a Christian, amazing, or, they became a Christian. Let's see.
I don't know. It's really weird the way that people in general become invested in other people's journeys, whether they're invested in a positive view or they invested in a negative view. There are people, like you say, that when, for example, if we're going to talk about celebrities, when celebrities give their heart to God or not even, like sometimes they don't even come out and they profess that they are like serving God. But we see like a Justin Bieber who's all of a sudden singing a song that is a Christian song, and now the world is going crazy. Justin Bieber sang a worship song, and then all of a sudden, like it's like building this hoopla, and then you're criticizing, and he sang this song today, but then the next day he was at a party, I feel like people get really invested in what other people are doing. It could be because of the age of social media, the age of pop media, where people are just constantly keeping tabs on what celebrities are doing. But we see that also trickle into how people react to new believers as well, that, all of a sudden they become hyper vigilant of what they do and what they don't do, and they have an opinion on it. And I think that unless you are someone who God has specifically called or moved to be a mentor to an individual, it's really none of your business. And that sounds really rough and like straight to the point, but it really isn't, because I feel like a lot of times you wind up doing more harm than good. Not so long ago, I think like a month or two ago, Kat Von D, who is she's a tattoo artist who had like these shows on TLC, and she's really known in the tattoo artistry world and the makeup world and all that other stuff, had posted a video of her getting baptized, and the video went viral. Everybody was like, oh man, Kat gave her heart to God, and she professed. It was like a video where she posted, I've got baptized, I gave my heart to God, like that whole great thing. So there wasn't is she doing this for Jesus? Is she not? It was like straight up, like I gave my heart to the Lord. But I think that people, specifically when it comes to her and her church and her people, I think people had a lot to say because they didn't look like the typical white collar Christians. These are people that have tattoos on them, and they have an aesthetic that's very eclectic, and some people would say kind of gothic, and stuff like that. And I was reading this article where the first thing she said was, I don't feel really equipped to be the poster child for Christianity. I think that I'm still learning, and as I do, I'll become more equipped, but for the time being, I feel like I've never really been that, and I don't plan on doing that. Number one, I think that we put a pressure, especially on celebrities, famous people that give their heart to God, to all of a sudden be the poster child. They have to walk right. They have to talk right. They have to immediately, like all of a sudden, like they decided they love Jesus and now they have to be perfect. And we put such a pressure on people because we become so critical of what they do, what they say, what they wear. And she later on in the thing, she starts saying that it was really the Christians who were the worst. It was really just sad to see this critical display of judgment from Christians. And I don't understand what would inspire that, aside from something that's more egotistical, because that isn't Christ-like to judge people or judge people's journey. And I think that she hit the nail on the head. You know, all of us have gone through our own journeys with God. There's some of us that have been serving God our whole life, but you've still gone through your journeys with God too, that nobody knows about. Nobody knows about your rebellious moments. Nobody knows about the times you were doing things you weren't supposed to be doing. And these people are in the limelight, which some people will say, well, that's what you get. You know, when it comes, you're famous, so then you take the good and you take the bad. You're going to receive the criticism from being famous. But as Christians, I think that is really important for us not to allow ourselves to use it the enemy, where somebody who just gave their heart to God, their response is, it wasn't the atheist, it wasn't the devil worshippers, it wasn't people that don't believe in this or believe in that treated me the worst. It was actually the Christians that treated me the worst. And I think that's just horrible.
Yeah, I've heard this statement before. People say that Christians are the individuals that kill their own wounded, right? So, like, for whatever reason, you know, it seems like, you know, the church or Christians have gotten this horrible rap for, you know, you mess up, you failed, and you're a Christian, like, you know, we shun you, right? Like, you shouldn't have done that. Like, you shouldn't, you know, you stepped out of line. How dare you, right? And we have this kind of, at times, this judgmental, condemning attitude about us, right? Forgetting, like you said, that we as well are imperfect. We are flawed, right? And a lot of times our sins are not public, right? Our lives are not as public as these celebrities or public figures. So it's easy for us to get away with certain things. You know what I mean? It's easy for us to mess up and only 3 people know about it compared to 3,000 or 3 million, right? So, you know, you have these public figures who are, you know, changing their lives, let's say, or having this Jesus moment in their lives. They're getting baptized, they're professing their faith, they're seen at a church, right? Immediately, you know, you have those group of Christians who now, like you said, hold them to this standard and hold them to, you know, they're supposed to be, like you say, the face of Christianity today, right? I think we kind of experienced that years back with Kanye, right? When Kanye was kind of going through his whole situation, and then we saw he was, you know, having, like, you know, moments where it was not cool, right? He was saying things that were not cool, and the Christians were like really for him at one point, and like, and then all of a sudden he started doing these things, and they were like, you know,
but even at his height, with, you know, the whole Sunday services and stuff like that, there were still people that were highly critical. I was someone who had a lot of reservations about it as well, that I've shared on the podcast, because you're just like, I don't know, like, because I'm always from the perspective of, I think it's best to stay neutral. Like, don't, like, all of a sudden somebody gives their heart to God, so now you're buying all their merch, you're buying all their music, you're like doing all this stuff, but also don't sit there and criticize as well.
And at the same time, you can have your opinion, right? I just think it's how you go about these things. You know what I mean? There's no reason to go under their post on their social media pages and bash them or you know, say certain things. That doesn't really accomplish much. You know what I mean? But unfortunately, Christians are, you know, some Christians are the type of people that they jump on those things, you know, and it's so easy to fall into that trap of, you know, seeing someone on a journey, because we forget they are on a journey, you know what I mean? And they have to do it publicly. You know what I mean? Are they going to make mistakes? Are they imperfect? Of course, right? But it's one of those things where you need to recognize, okay, they are now a brother or sister in the faith. They are professing this, right? It's my responsibility and my job to pray for them. It's my responsibility to hold them in prayer, ask God to bless them with people that can keep them accountable, people that can mentor them, people that can give them discipleship and leadership and all of those things, right? But I am not their mentor. I am not their spiritual advisor. I am not, you know, the person that gives them counsel. So my little comment on social media about something they're doing that seems off or not in alignment with what they're saying, right? I shouldn't be blasting them on social media for that. You know what I mean? And I think that a lot of times, you know, these public figures who end up making these decisions in their life and trying to follow Jesus, this turns them off so much and kind of like deviates them from the journey that they are on, because they begin to see Christians' real attitude, right? And they see the hearts that some Christians have, because, you know, in reality, I mean, and this is harsh to say, but, you know, the individual who professes to be a Christian but then is on these pages bashing these artists or talking about these people in such a negative light truly aren't a Christian. You know what I mean? Like, you're a Christian by what you're saying, but your actions are not proving that. You know, Jesus says, your love for the world will prove to them that you are my disciples. It's your love, right? Not your criticism, not your judgment, right? And we even do this, you know, Christians even do this when it comes to even pastors and leaders in the church. You know what I mean? Where we see someone recently, this podcaster, he was a pastor one time, Tim Ross, right? He has a podcast, and he was like caught in a moment because he had been saying a few things that people like were freaking out about, right? Like, saying basically he curses and he's totally fine with doing that on his platform, his Christian platform. He used certain metaphors in his messages that weren't like super appropriate, and it was all these things. And again, you could have disagreed with how he said it, his metaphor usage. You could disagree with, his ideology and idea of cursing and, all of that. But you don't have to go on now and bash and tell him that he's going to hell and send them to hell. And he was explaining kind of, in a recent interview I saw, all the backlash that he had received for saying these things, and how people were even sending like death threats, right? Now, whether those are Christians or not, it's just this idea of when you have platform and a big platform like that, everyone has an opinion and all eyes are on you. Whether you're a Christian that just converted or you've always been a Christian, you're a pastor, you're well known in the church. You do something that people don't really align with or don't really vibe with, they will come after you. And a lot of times it's the Christians, right? Who are viewing what you're doing through their lens, through their actions, right? And do they have a point sometimes? Maybe. We kind of experience this when it comes to Halloween, right? I was seeing a bunch of posts on people condemning Halloween, right? Pastors, right? If you're a pastor and you're, accepting Halloween, like, how dare you, devil's holiday, all of that, right? Under the comments of all of these reels that were popping up around Halloween were just Christians and church leaders going at it with each other, bashing each other, condemning each other, basically saying, how dare you do this? Well, this is what we do. Well, that's like the same thing. And it was like, then the people that were putting up these posts, these pastors were then responding, right? Putting up another post about the controversies that they're creating. You know what I mean? So it just becomes this whole like cesspool of opinions and thoughts and things. You know what? At the end of the day, right? You are not that pastor's spiritual advisor. You are not that pastor's counselor. You are not that pastor's, person to hold them accountable. Let's hope and pray that they have people that do hold them accountable and that would have those conversations. But it just creates more of a division, right? When we begin to condemn and speak so loudly about certain things, but then there are things in our own lives that because nobody knows about, we don't bring up or we don't talk about.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that it's so, in a way, fascinating to be to observe the behaviors of individuals that feel compelled and moved to leave the bashing comments and stuff like that and like repost it with others like negative things about it, because I have never experienced something that has moved me to have to do that. You see something and you disagree with it and then feel the need to be like, you're going to hell because of whatever. I don't get that. I don't understand that. I have seen people who for whatever reason they felt the need to have to comment, but have handled it gracefully, in the sense of, maybe they'll say something like, I really don't agree with what you're doing. I'll be praying for you because I feel like you're going down the wrong path, or I don't know, like something like that's letting, because they felt the need that they had to let the individual know that they don't agree with whatever they said or how they said it, but it's done in a way that isn't like threatening, and it's not done in a way where they're condemning them to hell. It's more like, I'm gonna pray so that God can touch your heart so that you can see why this isn't the appropriate time to say this or do this and all the other stuff, which at the end of the day, if you're moved to do that, whatever, to each his own. That's what you got a platform for. But I will say that bringing it down to the scope of the people that we interact with on a daily, I think that's why it's very important. Like I said before, if you aren't called to be the person to mentor someone who comes to your church for the first time, and to just teach them, there's churches that are more conservative than other churches. So I think that that applies more to those type of churches. There's churches that aren't as conservative or as modest. So basically you come as you are, you leave as you are, you live your life as you are. Nobody's going to tell you anything about it. But then there's other churches that have certain expectations and standards that new people sometimes have to assimilate to. And I think it's up to the church leadership to really educate the newbies on why that's a choice that you make, and what that looks like. It is not your responsibility to then go out of your way to criticize what that person is. There's some churches that are conservative in the way that they dress, so because of that, people may have to switch up the way that they dress. So just because somebody gave their heart to God last Sunday, don't expect them to show up the next Sunday decked out the way that you think that they need to be decked out in. No, like, everybody's process is different. God works in everybody differently. And, I think that especially as Christians, unfortunately, we focus a lot on outward appearances. And that's and our pastor talks about that a lot too, that it's so dangerous to be someone who is led by outside appearances, because it's so easy for you to be fooled by someone who looks like they have it together, that looks like, oh, that person is dressed in a way that I feel like Christians should be dressed. So all of a sudden you give them all this confidence and all this trust that they're living a godly life, when in reality, behind closed doors, they're not. When in reality, their heart is nowhere near God's heart. And, then you have someone who doesn't look the way that you feel like they should look, but they're amazing. There's someone who is close to God's heart. There's someone who's always led by God, who's sensitive to his voice, but because they look a certain way, you treat them differently. And I think that as Christians, that is not what we're supposed to be doing. At the end of the day, we're not supposed to be judging anyone. That's number one. Number two, you're supposed to also be sensitive to the Spirit, so that the Spirit can then let you know through discernment whether or not someone is from God, whether someone's not from God, whether or not someone needs, some help or some counseling or some guidance. And when it's not God moving you to speak to someone about certain things, then you stay quiet and you keep it moving. You pray about it. If you see something in someone that looks a little off, or I wish somebody would tell them to do X, Y, and Z, but you don't feel God is moving you to be the person to speak to them, then you pray about it. And you're like, Lord, I really want this person to, I don't know, figure out that what the way they're presenting themselves, I don't know, it's a little off. God, help me. Give me the word so that one day, if the opportunity comes up to do it, or God, if it's in you for me to do it, I'll speak to my leaders about whatever it is. But I think that we have to be very careful, because at the end of the day, especially new believers, they're still in the process of understanding that just because Christians fail doesn't mean God fails. Just because Christians can be mean doesn't mean that God is mean. Just because Christians can be evil at times doesn't mean that God is evil. They're still in that process of understanding that. So when someone who is supposed to be representing Christ on earth does negative to them, it's very easy for them to be like, oh, so then that means that God is that same way, Jesus is that same way, when it's not. So that's why it's our responsibility to try our best to be Christ-like, even in what we say and how we say it and how we interact with others.
Yeah, and like you said, Christians struggle with placing people on pedestals.
Yeah.
Christians struggle with having high expectations for someone, and when they fall and they have their weak moment, sometimes Christians don't know what to do with themselves. So imagine, right, an individual who is just accepting the Lord and just starting in their spiritual journey, and they're getting bashed and criticized by all these Christians. It is so much easier for them to fall into the trap of, is this how God is? Is this how his people really are? Is this how, the Christian community is, right? And it just leaves like such a bad representation, right, in their eyes for who God is and who his people are. You know what I mean? And it really does come down to expectations. Yeah. We begin to place these false expectations on people, hold them in this place where, they're a Christian artist, they're our favorite worship band, so we expect them to live their life the way we live it.
Which you don't. Which that's the other thing. Like, we place expectations on people that aren't even realistic for ourselves, because we don't hold ourselves to those standards, but we expect other people to abide by that.
And sometimes we do, like in the sense of like, I don't celebrate Halloween.
Oh, okay.
They better not, right? We go to church every Sunday. Oh, you don't go to church every Sunday. We go to church 3 times a week, right? But in the other side, like what you're saying, you know what I mean? It's like, no one is saying, I tell the truth always. I'm super honest. Are you guys being super, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's very, like you said, outward. It's by the outward appearance, right? They need to look the part. They need to post, certain things on social media, because if not, they don't even post Jesus. They just post their family. They don't post any Bible verses. They just post, you know what I mean? And those are things that people say, you know what I mean? Like, if you look at some, Christian, influencers or public figures, in the comments, there'll be people that are like bashing the weirdest things, or like telling them the weirdest things. Like, you haven't posted a verse this week. Like, literally, I remember seeing that not too long ago. Someone said, like, you haven't posted a verse this week, right?
And
because that individual would post a lot of verses throughout the week. Okay, maybe they're not posting them anymore. Are you now making an assumption that individual is not reading their Bible anymore? Because I know of a lot of people that would just post a verse real quick and they didn't open up their Bible to read it or study it.
True.
They're posting it for whatever they can get, whatever feedback and engagement they can get. So again, the expectations that we place on people sometimes are very unrealistic, like you said, for ourselves, for them. And I understand the need as a Christian community to want to feel like we are all in this together, right? To feel like we have each other's back, to feel like we are all, worshiping God, praising God, like serving him, right? And I know it's hard to process when people that we do look up to, people that are in our community, do certain things that misrepresent or do things that we just feel like, okay, that's wrong, right? Or again, matter of preference. They're wearing a certain thing that you're like, as Christians, I don't think we should be wearing that, right? It's easy to get that initial feeling of like that letdown and just feeling like they're doing something wrong. And a lot of times they may not be doing something wrong. It's probably through your lens of how you were, raised, what your preferences are, what your convictions are. You know what I mean? We spoke about that not too long ago. The idea of like, not everyone's convictions are the same, right? You should have convictions of sin, yes. But now there are Christians that will have different standards for certain things that not everybody who's a Christian, right, will believe it in that same way, right? In the sense of, whether certain types of movies we watch or certain type of places we go to or certain type of activities we do, right? There are people that love to play pool, will never go play pool in like, a type of bar setting or like a place like that if there's a bar there. And then there are like other people who are like, dude, but I'm not here for that. I'm here to play pool, right? And it's like, are you gonna bash that individual? And like now is a whole war over what's allowed, what's not, what's right, what's wrong. So again, I think it's our job to pray. It's our job to guide the people that God has placed in our life. You know what? Go back to your church community and make sure the people within your church, right, and the people that God has entrusted you with to be in community, right, are being held accountable then.
Absolutely.
And you are helping each other grow. Iron sharpening iron, and you are like helping each other out. Leave everybody else alone. And let their people do that.
And let their people do that. Absolutely. And I think also that if you are around individuals that are placing other people on pedestals, whether it be celebrities or whoever, where all of a sudden they think that they're the new face of Christianity, it's okay to have conversations with them so that they understand that they're human. So it's quite possible that 3 months from now, they'll do something that they should not have done, post something, or TMZ catches them somewhere they're not supposed to be or whatever. Like, understand that because of their humanity, that may happen. Are we praying for that to happen? No, we don't want that to happen, but it'll help the person for when their legs are kicked from under them, that all of a sudden this poster child that they had for Christianity is not perfect. It'll help them process that. Because I feel like, especially like young people as well, like they're still working on that understanding of how does it work? What does it mean to be human and serve God? Which is a whole other thing. That whole ideology behind that it means that you want to serve God, but because of your imperfections, you will commit mistake, you will sin, you will do things you're supposed to. But that's where God's grace and mercy jumps in, to ¿cómo se diría para suplantar? Like, what's the word in English? To cover us in those areas and in those moments because of our humanity. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I think that our goal for today and the conversation that we're having today was to just set a reminder for everyone to, number one, when it comes to like celebrities and famous people that are, or whoever with high social media platforms that are going through their spiritual journeys, like, let them have their spiritual journey. Let them do their thing. If you see something that they did that you don't like or whatever, if you feel the need that you have to comment on stuff, do the Christ thing and be like, we're praying for you or whatever. Like, there's no reason to send anybody to hell. There's no reason to send death threats. There's no reason to do any of that stuff or whatever. In your immediate circle, I think it's important to have conversations, especially with young peoples, about understanding other people's spiritual journeys and what that may look like for them. It may look very different than what it looks like for you. And when you have new people in your church, just giving them the grace and the freedom to discover how to serve God for themselves. Obviously, as a church, we're there to help them, we're there to guide them, we're there to teach them, give them biblical foundations, all that stuff or whatever. But everybody's journey is a little different. So just because your journey happened a certain way doesn't mean that it'll happen that way for them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think right there is a good place to stop, right? Yeah. So we want to thank you for tuning in to today's episode. Thank you for riding with us, right? And checking us checking our website, our episodes out every week. And we just pray that, again, today's conversation has blessed you and uplifted you and encouraged you to go out there and be a blessing, right? And, help those around you for sure. So we want to just remind you, follow us on our social media platforms on Facebook, Instagram at God Life Culture Podcast. Check us out on YouTube as well. Be sure to subscribe so you can be notified every time we drop a new episode.
Yeah, so thank you once again for tuning into the latest episode of the God Life Culture Podcast. That's God Life Culture. Until next time.
See ya.
Bye.